factor. Taiwan effectively is like an offshoot of America. So Taiwan's prosperity is basically America's prosperity. So we disregard Taiwan. It's really us and America. Here, I stress again, we hadn't lived through these 20 years. When MDP speaks, MDP will tell you how living through the 20 years gave him that much more conviction and vision. Say China acha kar raha hai. China acha kar raha hai is a repeated refrain. If you look at your city is actually a very good mini version. Your city is a mini version of how India has changed. One more interesting loser is the SME, right? And this is one of the great. A lot of people in our country tell us that other emerging markets are doing much better. They say China acha kar raha hai. China acha kar raha hai is a repeated refrain I hear in India. Less outside India, nobody really has got any fascination left about China. In India, we are endlessly fascinated by China, not least because a lot of our things are, a lot of the stuff that we use, I'm pretty sure this mic and this clicker is made in China, right? But if you look at this data, right, this is now India versus other emerging markets. And we've deliberately taken the most dynamic emerging markets. We've taken China, we've taken Indonesia, South Korea, and then emerging markets as a whole. Again, there is no comparison. So if you had invested 12 years ago, had you invested $10,000 in India and in other places, a decade on, we would have doubled. India's doubled that $10,000 investment. No other emerging market comes close. And interestingly, the breakaway year is 2021. Right? That's again why stock markets are fascinating. 2021 for most of us is a really painful year. Not only were we stuck at home, broadcast media was full of pictures of people dying. Several of us lost friends and family. And yet, if you look back, and I think, you know, when I'm retired and when I'm long gone, academics will study 2021 and try to figure out what happened in 21. Why did India break away decisively? Why did India break away decisively from we'll call MDP once we are done. MDP will give his lived version, right? So why did India break away decisively in 21? I think will become a subject of great study. Much like, you know, America, they study what happened in 1929. To this day, people don't realize. To this day, Americans don't know why did 1929 trigger the Great Depression. To this day, we still don't fully understand what happened in 21. Now, there's another way to understand this, right? Which is, if you look at your city is actually a very good mini version. Your city is a mini version of how India has changed. That till 1980s, what is electronic city today? Till 1980s, it was farmland, right? It was called Konappana Agrahara. What are the crops being grown there? Paddy. So rice, right? Rice and millets being grown there, right? Konappana Agrahara, cows were grazing there. 1980s electronic city came up, but by and large, from the looks of it, and MDP's recollections will be invaluable. From what we can see, was a few boards and a few signboards saying, "Ye BHL ka office hai." I doubt BHL was actually there. Hewlett Packard also has a signboard. This is 1980s ka picture. And then 1991, India liberalizes. 92 MDP Infosys IPO. 93 Infosys IPO, and that year, Infosys puts up the campus there. From Infosys's campus inauguration in 93 to the current day, property prices in electronic city are up 250x. Just 250 guna, 250x. And then even more irrelevantly, some 10-15 years ago, MDP, a bunch of other people convinced the government in this city to build this elevated carriageway from Silk Board to Electronic City. I don't know whether we would have ever seen Electronic City without this elevated carriageway, right? Courtesy of the elevated carriageway, all of us now zip through. And then if you build out the physical infrastructure, the rest of it follows. Housing, shopping malls, and so on follows. And you can see the power of it. The world's largest electronics company by profitability. Apple has decided that a quarter of their phones and pads will be made combination of Hosur and Chennai, right? In fact, Apple has now said early next year, AirPods are also going to start. Up tak they were doing phones and pads. Early next year, AirPods are going to start. 2 years ago, India made $2 billion of smartphones. This year, India made $25 billion of smartphones, courtesy Apple. Most of that is happening in the suburbs of your city. My iPhone SE. A lot of my colleagues, have comments on my iPhone SE, but my iPhone SE is a Bangalore-made iPhone, And Apple has announced last week that their new chip, Apple is also going to make chips. Their new chip is going to go into the iPhone SE, which will be made in Hosur, right? So this in a way is the unusual rise of modern India. You can quickly see the winners and losers here, right? And this is a theme which we'll keep coming back to. The winners are, say, a company like Infosys, the founders, the staff, the ESOP holders, right? Tens of billions of dollars of wealth. The farmers who sold land to Infosys, right? MDP and colleagues bought that land. The farmers who sold land to Infosys also made some money, right? They might not have made as much as Infosys founders themselves, but they made some money. But you can see the losers here as well. If you were a landless laborer in Konappana, Agrahara, you are highly unlikely to have got a job in Hosur. How many manufacturing jobs in South India, Nandita? So there are all of 6 million manufacturing jobs, right? Our country has been a laggard in creating manufacturing jobs. So the probability of landing a manufacturing job, if you as a landless farmer are thrown out of the farm, is actually quite low. So we don't know where they are, but my suspicion is that the landless laborers, the landless farmers would have gone deeper into the Karnataka countryside or into the Tamil Nadu countryside, right? Because it's the chances of landing a manufacturing job in Hosur are actually quite low. And remember, this is one of the most efficient places in India for manufacturing. Even then, all of South India just has 6 million people in manufacturing. Then an even more interesting loser is the SME, right? And this is one of the great paradoxes of India's development. The data from the government of India shows that most small businesses are getting their profit margins squeezed, right? And the simplest way to understand this is, if you were a Kirana store, in Konappana, Agrahara, you would face less competition than if you are trying to sell Kirana store stuff in Electronic City today. Because if you're trying to sell Kirana store stuff in Electronic City today, QCom, Ecom, modern retail, everybody's going to squeeze your margins, right? So one of the big ironies of India's development has been that the most SMEs have come out on the receiving side of it, right? In spite of that, what's remarkable is that the country's narrative has changed. My dad grew up in the 60s. He went to IIT Kharagpur in 71. I was born in 76. My dad told me through the 80s that in the 60s, people would die on the pavements in Kolkata out of hunger. India had 2 famines in the 60s. Not only did we get thrashed by China in the 62 war, right? We also had 2 famines in the 60s. But this is a democracy, it responds. One of the reasons we are able to give America a fight for its money, we're the only country, remember, barring India, the only other country which compounds strongly over decades is America. And these are 2 large free market democracies. Free market democracies work because if the public gets a raw deal, it demands an answer. In a democracy, it demands an answer. M.S. Swaminathan in the Green Revolution in the 70s made us initially self-sufficient, now one of the world's largest food producers. Right? We don't realize it. We're one of the largest food producing nations in the world. Milk, not only not only essential staples, but also milk, eggs, increasingly a bunch of cash crops. We're actually become an agri powerhouse courtesy the Green Revolution. Then 1991, balance of payments crisis, Manmohan Singh ji, Narasimha Rao to the rescue, liberalization of the country. And what's followed next, most of us realize. But in this book, in Behold the Leviathan, my favorite chart is this chart, right? It's in chapter 1 of the book. I'll explain the chart. Thoda sa chota print hai, aapko dikh nahi raha. What Nandita did painstakingly was she collated data from various arms of the government to figure out how many Indians lose their lives each year to crime, to terrorist outrages, to insurgencies and so on. Right? If you collate data from various sources, you can see how many Indians lose their lives to unlawful elements. Call it terrorism, call it crime, call it insurgency. Right? And what you have is around the turn of the century, 2,500 Indians would die every year. So every week, 50 Indians' lives would be lost. Every day, roughly 10 Indians would lose their lives to elements who were beyond the control of the government of India. Right? That number has come down from 2,500 to less than 100 per annum. Right? People like us, CNBC folks like us love talking about macro fundamentals. But honestly, if you think about it, no, more than macro fundamentals, what matters is, can a country protect the lives of its citizens? And I think on that, India has done a remarkable job. Right? There is no discussion on this. No, we don't discuss this quarter how many people lost their lives to unlawful elements. But our country has come together. The polity, the law and order, law enforcement agencies, civil society has come together to produce one of the most peaceful societies in the world. Right? If you go to America, right, you will worry more about your life and limb. When I go to America on work, I now worry far more than going to any part of India, including North India, right? And this poor fellow who got killed last week in New York, right? 10 days ago, this poor fellow got killed in New York, right? That in a way exemplifies how that society is changing, right? We have created one of the safest societies in the world. Again, the Western media doesn't have this narrative. It's our narrative that we have created. Basis data, this is one of the safest countries to live in the world. And that has ramifications, no? Because if you believe your life is safe, then you can do the other things. Wo startup karo or world chess champion bano, whatever you choose to do with your life, you can only do that if you believe that you and your family are safe and sound. It's on this foundation that something remarkable has happened. So this line is, I think, the spine that defines India's prosperity. Nandita went to the Government of India's website. This is corporate tax data. 1.4 million companies are registered to pay corporate tax. 1 million file a nil return. So 1 million companies say, I have not made money. Okay? Let's take that at face value for now. 400,000 companies say we are making profits. Out of that 400,000, if you take the 70,000 most profitable Indian companies, so 17% of 400,000, 17% of 400,000, the most profitable companies in India, roughly 70,000 companies. The top 70,000 companies in India, profits are growing at 15% per annum, right? Now that's the 10-year CAGR. 15% is 10-year CAGR. Post-COVID, the CAGR is 25%, right? Again, we don't fully know what's happened here. Everybody has hypothesis, right? I told you that India broke away decisively from other emerging markets in 2021. Remember, COVID happened to the whole world. We were not the only people. Why is it that post-COVID we have broken away? Is still not clear, right? But the data is very clear that profitability for the 70,000 most profitable companies zips through post 2021, right? Now, if you delve deeper, there's even another more interesting layer, right? Take the top 7,000 companies, take the top 70,000 companies, and then look at the 10% who are the best amongst that. Now we're focusing on the top 7,000 companies. 70,000 say, hum 7,000 pe aa gaye. Right? Now we are the creme de la creme, 7,000 Indian companies. What you're seeing is a remarkable bifurcation. Right? It's not the largest companies which are growing the fastest. The top 1,000 or so companies are not growing the fastest in India. The fastest growing companies in India are the next 6,000. Right? So the fastest growing companies, we call them challengers. In the book, we have called them challengers. Their PAT, their profit after tax, is between 50 crores to 500 crores. 50 crores to 500 crores, that's the range where the challengers exist. 50 crores ke niche, life is a little tough. 500 crores ke upar, above 500 crores, you're in the ruler category. You're doing all right. But the fastest growth is 50 crores to 500 crores, right? And the story of the next 10 years, we think, will be these challengers going and hitting up the rulers. The challengers have better technology. They have leaner business models. We were joking outside about the increasingly redundant need for physical offices. Many of the challenger companies don't have any more than one office, right? Many of the challenger companies will have one office. The challenger companies mostly have intellectual property, either intellectual property in terms of specific code or branding or business processes or ways of training their people that the larger companies don't know. So the last 10 years were about smaller companies, right? Smaller companies, remember, 99% of India's companies are chota companies, PAT less than a crore. 99% of India companies are chota companies. They account for a mere 15% of India's PAT. 99% of companies account for 15% of PAT. They are the people who got pulverized in the last decade. The challengers have benefited from the demise of these chota companies, the plebeians. The next 10 years, the challengers will now attack the market-leading franchises. And you can see immediately why over the last 2 years, we've tried to bring about this change in our style of investing as well. Right? Till 2021, India wasn't like this, right? I stress again, this is a very recent phenomenon. This takeoff is very recent. This takeoff is not something I had seen in my first decade in India. When we saw the takeoff in 22, I mean, the data came in 21, but we saw the takeoff in 22. We got to work the book and then the reinvention of some of our portfolios. We'll discuss the the investment implications of this further on. But let me request Mohandas Pai ji to join the conversation at this stage. Sir, over to you for you to give the eyewitness account. Mohandas Pai ji has been instrumental in guiding Marcellus. Right, a lot of what we've been able to achieve is courtesy his guidance. But beyond us, right, in a way, we are probably the smallest of the entities he guides. He's on the board of the National Stock Exchange, the board of the Securities and Exchange Board of India, obviously long-standing board member of Infosys. So entities far larger than us and far more instrumental in India's progress have been guided by this remarkable man's wisdom. So over to you, sir, for you to tell us the eyewitness account. My parents left the country when the balance of payments crisis hit. Saddam Hussein attacked Kuwait. No, Kuwait. Saddam Hussein attacked Kuwait in 1990. Oil price took off. India ran out of foreign exchange reserves in the opening months of 1991. And fatefully, my parents migrated from the country then, never to come back. But in a way, that seems to be the beginning of modern India's rise. Right? What exactly happened between 91 and to this day to take a country which was amongst the poorest in the world in 91? Almost, by the way, balance of payments crisis means when a country runs out of money to pay for whatever it needs. So we had barely 10 days of foreign exchange reserves left in the summer of 91. Remember, we import oil. So Manmohan Singh ji and P.V. Narasimha Rao pawned our gold. They pawned our gold with, I think, Bank of England to get us some money to pay for oil. From the depths of that to the world's second most powerful compounding stock market, what's driven this change?
Saurabh, all of us need to understand India has historically been a very, very rich country. We are not a poor country. We are the largest arable land for any civilization in history, right from Peshawar to Dhaka. We were an agricultural power. We were a industrial power because the skilled artisans in this country. We traded with Rome, we traded with the entire world, much before the Silk Road and all that small things. And this was a place which created a lot of agricultural surpluses. And that's why we had culture, we had everything else. The tragedy started with the Islamic invasion from the east, which led to a lot of destruction within this country. Then the British colonial exploitation took place from 1750, Battle of Plassey, 1757. And that's around the time the Industrial Revolution took off in Europe, funded by the loot from, the gold from South America, the trade with Asia, and the surpluses that were created by the rise of the merchant class. It's the rise of the merchant class in Europe that led to the Industrial Revolution because they had surpluses. Till then, the wealth of a society was land, and it was the landlords and the lords and the kings who had serfs, people who had cultivated the land. 95% worked for the 5% to enjoy their lives. That changed with the trade coming in. All right, that created surpluses.
Would it be fair to say our surpluses funded their industrial revolution?
No, I'll come to that. From 1750 to around 1947, the British looted wealth which was $45 trillion in today's value. $45 trillion. And they did it in a very unique way. I'll explain that. There's an article written by Utsa Patnaik, Dr. Utsa Patnaik of Colombo University. Just Google and find out, and you'll read some extraordinary things. First thing is, they made sure that they went and they put 50% land revenue on farmers. The Mughals put 50%, British put 50% land revenue, and whether the farmers had a crop or not, they had to pay. If they didn't have a crop, they had to sell their livestock and pay. They were vicious. That took away the money. They bought agricultural produce at lower rates and created surpluses for them. They made them grow indigo and all that nice stuff. We saw it in the Lagan movie, and impoverish the farmers. There's a book you must read called The Case for India. And you must read it because you must cry for your country, so that never again such loot will ever happen in our history. That's the reason. We must know our history so that never again will we be exploited. Okay? So they took from farmers. Second, what they did when the Industrial Revolution took place, they took raw material from here. Manchester became the textile capital of the world, not Dhaka, not India. And they cut off the thumbs of the Dhaka Muslim weavers to make sure, because the Dhaka muslin is supposed to be the finest cloth in the world. An entire blanket could be put through a ring, a finger ring, right? It is very, very fine. And we had great skills there, and they destroyed that and made them go back into the land. So skilled artisans went back to the land and got impoverished further. and they dumped finished goods here, and they put tariffs for Indian goods to go to UK. And the next, whenever foreigners or others bought Indian goods,
Right, sir.
they had to pay for it in gold in London.
Right. Right.
Just imagine this. Look at the deviousness. When foreigners bought Indian goods, the French bought Indian goods, they had to pay for it in gold in London, and the money was deposited with the Bank of England. Against that, they gave something called council bills. Council bills to the seller. Suppose I am in India, I sell to an American, then American will put that payment in London, and British will issue me council bills, and I could take the council bills to the East India Company or the local government here and get it redeemed in rupees. And where did the rupees come? Rupees came out of the taxes. So they taxed you, 50% land revenue taxed you, collected the money, and then your goods were exported. Out of the tax, they bought your goods, exported, and made profits. So they impoverished India, 45 trillion. And then what happened? After we became free, Pandit Nehru was in Harrow, and he was a great economist, he was a great Fabian socialist follower. He suppressed Indian capital, brought in licensed quota Raj. Till then, India was a free market economy. We could trade. We became rich because of free markets. He brought in licensed quota Raj. Gandhiji has said, this desh mein sarkar vyapari hai, us desh mein janta bikari hai. So we became bikaris. But in 1950 to 1980, we grew at about 3.5% a year. Asia grew at 6.5%, world grew at 4.5%. We became poorer in 1980 compared to 1950 on a comparative basis. But in these years, the Asian tigers came up, Germany came up, Japan came up, and 1978, China opened up too. 1978, when China opened up, we were 150 billion, they were 150 billion. Right? So these suppressed us. Indira Gandhi followed it up, nationalized banking, nationalized everything else, because they said government to run business. When government run business, corruption comes, the centralization of power, they suppress private capital. When you suppress private capital, suppress entrepreneurship, you destroy the economy. And in 1980, we opened up. In 1980, we grew 5.5%, 1980 to 90. Foreign debt grew from 20 billion to 80 billion. And I think that's funded by foreign debt. So in 1991, we are broke with $5 billion of reserves, 15 days of imports. And that forced India to open up. And the IMF forced India to open up, because we went to the IMF for about $5 billion of reserves. We pledged our goals, and we got $400 billion, $400 million from Bank of England. I think now the gold is coming back. The gold has kept a security there. The gold is coming back. I think we pledged about 150 tons of gold or something, I remember right. So when we opened up, our GDP was 275 billion. In March 1991, GDP was 275 billion. It came to 3.5 trillion in 2024 March, 8.11% a year in dollar terms, never seen before. And it grew from 5,32,000 crores to 296 lakh crores between March 91 to March 2024, about 12.96% a year in rupee terms. Now, all your figures are dollar terms, okay?
Yes, sir.
You must show a similar figure for Indians in rupee terms, because if we invest, we earn in rupees, not in dollars. So dollars is for comparison for foreigners. For Indians, you must show the same rupees. So rupee terms, 12.96%. We grew at 8.11% for 33 years. 12.96% CAGR for 33 years. That's the genius of the Indian people. We got economic freedom back in 1991, and that is what allowed the Indian businessmen to expand, to do many things. There was resistance in India to opening up. That was very good. In fact, Saurabh Mukherjea, the president of IMA, I called Rahul Bajaj for a meeting, and I praised him and said, Rahul, if you had not resisted the full opening of the Indian economy fast, we would have had all multinational ruling this country. We wouldn't have Indian companies. Because when you're being suppressed for 30, 40 years, you've been suppressed. Then suddenly you got competition. You can't compete. You have no capital. You have no efficiency. You are nothing. You are subscale. And somebody could come and it's a battle of the cost of capital. The cost of equity in America is about 8%. India is about 14%. And you have to compete. And they have unlimited capital. They would have bought all your companies. And the CPIM also pushed back. So democracy works. But there's a pushback. That's why you have Mahindra making cars. You have Tata's making cars. You have Maruti here, right? But you wouldn't have had all of them if, if you had just opened up. Ford, Toyota. Ford and, GM are very old legacy companies. They're losing the battle to China. So you see this. So we opened up. And what happened? Indians invested. We had economic freedom. We could import easily. Before that, if you go abroad, they didn't give you dollars. You'd apply to RBI for dollars, they didn't give you dollars. And many Indians went to the US with $8 in the pocket. Remember? You hear stories? Yeah. That $8 was because you go to the airport, show your passport, they give you $8.
My dad used to go.
Now they give you $50. You don't have to apply. Go to the counter and show the passport. I want $50. They'll give you $50. It was suppression, oppression, destruction on a massive scale, and we were all like frogs in the getting boiled, happy, because we never knew what prosperity was. We had to stand in the queue for milk. We had to stand in the queue for food grains. We had to stand. I went to meet my mechanic. I had a SD.
Yeah.
Not SD, my bicycle then. Asked him for a puncture. SD. I went to him near that शिवाजी नगर and asked him, आपके पास इतने बच्चे क्यों है? साहब क्या करना है? रेशन के लिए एक बच्चा चाहिए, दूध के लिए एक बच्चा चाहिए, गैस के लिए एक बच्चा चाहिए, इसको एक बच्चा या 5 बच्चे चाहिए क्यों में जाने के लिए. That is the attitude of India. It was terrible. We never knew it was terrible because we didn't know anything else. We never saw prosperity, and the government lived in prosperity. And there's a problem there because they had government officials at bungalows, they had cars, the ministers, everything. They had a great life and didn't have to work too much because there's nothing to do. They had to allocate, power. They knew how to manage poverty. Today we are in a mess because they don't know how to manage prosperity. Prosperity means people buy cars, people buy houses, people travel. So you got to build roads, you got to build infrastructure, you got to build. They don't know how to do. And there's so much of money and there's huge corruption. In my state, ADR, that Association Democratic Reforms wrote, I think, you can Google and see, that the MLAs here have the highest wealth compared to any group of MLAs in any state in India. And Karnataka's GDP this year will be 28 lakhs 50,000 crores, 4 lakh 25,000 crores per capita income, $5,000 per head, the richest state in India. So the classic example what happened. And then the boom in software and others started. Because services, we could grow in services because the world was going to the digital revolution. And then remember we had the mainframe giving rise to the PC and distributed computing with servers coming up. And then we had the Y2K coming up. And then we had the internet boom of 2000 to 2003. Then the internet crashed. Then we had the enterprise SAP boom and all that. And then we had the global financial crisis. And then we had an upsurge in spending. And then now we have got automation on the scale. Now we got hypercloud, we got AI and all the stuff. And India grew. We grew from, today we export $215 billion of software. 60% of global outsourcing comes here. And we have about 7 million people working in software, second largest in the world, 6 million in exports, 6 billion in exports, balance in local industry or in startups. And if you look at that, out of the top 10 most valuable software service company market value in the world, 5 are Indian. Of the top 5, 3 are Indian. Of the 3.2 million employees in the top 10, 2.3 million are Indians. The world hires 1 million software engineers a year, 500,000 are Indians. America has 6 million people in software, 1 million are there, working there. Out of this 6 million here, 60% work for American companies. Out of 10 million working for American companies globally, 4 million are Indians. And in software services, we have a surplus of $160 billion. And today, we export services, including remittances, which is again from people, something like this year, I think we'll be exporting something like about $400 million. We'll have a surplus of $215 million. We have a trade deficit in goods of $260 billion, $45 billion. In 3 years' time, if the surplus on services becomes equal to the deficit on goods, the currency will start appreciating. Because we have a current balance of payment deficit of 1.2%, which requires foreign capital. Now, we've been through all this. And it's amazing. We got our freedom back. That's why you should never lose economic freedom. If government brings in license control, you must stand and protest. Now we got Twitter and social media to protest. And you must ask for performance from government. Government is falling behind in everything. So it has been an amazing time. The age of innocence was when we are shut.
Yes. Yeah.
Because we never knew better.